Like many others, my gaming backlog is totally out of control. Not only do I likely own more games than I will ever have the time to play, they also just keep coming out and increasing that total ever further. Just over a year ago, I decided to do something about it. After watching the first two excellent backlog videos by Daryl Talks Games, I decided I'd use his method to make some sort of attempt to get through more games. I wasn't setting myself any particular goals or a time limit, the sole purpose was just to get all the games I wanted to play into a list so I could decide what to play faster and avoid more instances of sitting staring at my library in choice paralysis.
So, what worked, what didn't, what did I play, and most importantly, would I recommend something like this to a friend or family member, or you for that matter? Not to completely steal the format of Daryl's video, but to tell you that, we have to start at the beginning.
January is normally a pretty quiet month for me work-wise, so I took some extra time to finish off a bunch of games I had hanging over me from 2023. Katana Zero and Ghost Runner are both excellent, fast-paced samurai/ninja games with similar gameplay styles but drastically different themes and plotlines. Katana Zero in particular had some really interesting things going on with time travel and decision making, which I didn't expect but wasn't upset at. After this, I played both Red Matter VR games back to back in a single weekend. I've been into VR for years, but the one thing that I always struggled with was getting so immersed in a game that I didn't want to get out for breaks. These are the first games that fully gripped me and made me want to plug into the headset for a whole day until I was done. The first is a decent game with an intriguing story, but the second is one of the best VR games I've ever played. Now sure, it's no Half-Life Alyx in terms of details, polish, gameplay, writing, or really anything, but it's a great example of a story-focused VR game that's more than just a tech demo or a tiny indie. Plus, it's one of the first games I played on the Quest 3 that really wowed me with the visuals. This is running on essentially a tiny laptop or a big phone, and it looks incredible. Both great games that are well worth playing, and I was extremely happy with my time spent. I wrapped up the month with Signalis, and if you've watched anyone else that makes essays, you don't need me to tell you just how good a game this is. Sure, I might not have gelled with some of the puzzles and the painfully small inventory, but the vision here is next level. I've completed the game and also watched multi-hour-long videos analysing the plot, and I'm still not entirely sure what's going on, and no one really is. There's just so much here that I've not really seen any other game do, from the mesmerising visuals and haunting soundtrack that made it into my Spotify Wrapped. This is a true treasure that no doubt kicked off my obsession with PlayStation-style survival horror. In the shortest month of the year, I mainly finished a bunch of shorter titles. Milk Inside a Bag of Milk, Inside a Bag of Milk, and Slay the Princess are both games with some degree of I can fix her, and I'm trying to, with pretty dramatically different results. They're both excellently written, beautifully presented, and can be completed in a very short period of time, and that's exactly what I did. No doubt there's more to both of these with repeated playthroughs, but there's no time to think about that, so I keep moving forward. Shapes is just a great factory game, and I love those, so it was always going to be a winner, nothing more to say. The Walking Dead, Saints and Sinners is another VR game I'd been working through for a while and used this project as an excuse to finally finish it. The gameplay is really fun, with tense, satisfying combat, but the story is extremely dull and told in the most boring way imaginable for the format. I got it over the finish line so I could cross it off my list, and for not much reason beyond that.
And that brings me to something that I noticed a lot during this year. I've finished more games than I probably have in any other year of my life. But some of the time I was absolutely finishing them just so I could tick a box in my spreadsheet. I was very reluctant to just abandon something even if I wasn't enjoying it. I abandoned 3 games in total this year, and even those I'm mentally leaving the door open a crack to trying them again at some point in future. I think going into 2025 I should change the wording of abandoned so I don't feel like I'm throwing these games away. Anyway, back to February.
The second to last game I completed this month was The Last of Us Remastered. Now obviously, I'd heard this game was one of the greatest of all time, and I knew every plot beat as I'd just watched the show, and also the game's been out for a million years, so how can you not know? And yet, this game really is just that great. In theory, it should be the middest game of all time. It's a post-apocalyptic survival story with standard cover shooting action gameplay and some light looting and exploration. It really has no right to be this good, and somehow, it just is. For me, it really comes down to the writing. For some reason, the grumpy old dude learning to get along with the young child who's just the littlest bit annoying always works. It's just such a joy to see Joel learn to open himself up to caring for someone else again. He's obviously not a perfect paragon of purity and heroism, but you can understand why he does what he does, and that's just good writing. I could go on, but we have another huge game I need to talk about, so I'll wrap it up with this. If you've somehow not played this game yet because you think you know the twists or think it looks like a basic cover shooter, just try it. I promise you it will pull you in with an ultra combo KO of feelings, tense gameplay, and a very unique take on a zombie apocalypse. The final game I completed in February is not only one of the best games I've ever played and one that's had more of a profound effect on me than I can fit into this video, it's also one of the best games ever made. I'm of course talking about Baldur's Gate 3. What is there to say about this masterpiece that's not already been said? The writing is fantastic, the gameplay is near endless fun, and the performances are some of the best we've seen in any game, hell, in any medium ever. I cried multiple times when playing this game, and I guarantee I could boot it up right now, load up an old save and rewatch a cutscene and be in tears in moments. To say I love this game would be an understatement, and it's honestly heartbreaking thinking that I may not find time to replay it for a long time. It's what inspired me to start making videos on this channel. The feelings I went through when I completed this game go beyond anything I felt with anything else. I mourned finishing this game as it meant saying goodbye to a world and characters I had immersed myself in and loved spending time with for nearly 100 hours. I am grateful to have played this game and everyone involved in the making. Speaking of people making games, you'll struggle to find anyone in the industry right now that has more passion for the art than Sam Lake and the team at Remedy. Sure, Kojima might be up there, but we all know he's really just in it to photo scan as many beautiful celebrities as he can, and honestly, who can blame him? Alan Wake 2 is one of those games that you finish and you immediately go to Reddit to try to work out what exactly you just played. On a surface level, this is a third-person shooter / mystery game where you try to help Alan make his way out of the dark place. Take a single step back, and it's part of a multi-year-long transmedia experiment that the folks at Remedy are letting us take a peek at. There's too much to even begin to talk about all the things Alan Wake 2 even attempts. Does it always land? Of course not, but by God, it swings for the fences every single time, and you have to admire that. This is far from a perfect game, and honestly the first time you play it, you'll probably notice it's a little bit jank, but you can't deny the artistic vision on display, and for that, this is a truly special game. I'll always be grateful to it for helping me look at games as more than games in ways I never even thought of. After this, I wrapped up my time with Dave the Diver, which was a delight, and Superliminal, which was weird but honestly a real treat. Both of these were shorter, fun experiences that I probably won't talk about much in future, and honestly, that's something I felt I lost as the months went on, but I'll talk more about that later. I then decided to play Control, and I swear I'm not just copying Daryl because this was actually my second time through. I'd blasted through it years ago and I wanted to play the Alan Wake DLC to fill in the story gaps. Sadly, I owned the game on Epic after buying a graphics card, and buying the DLC there was more expensive than the complete edition on Steam, so here we go again. Just like Alan Wake 2, Control is one of those games you complete and you still don't really have a lot of idea of what's going on. The FBC in the oldest house could be a government agency, a doomsday cult, or a divine entity, and I wouldn't really be able to argue with any of them. Still, the gameplay is fun, and this is probably one of the best superhero games I've played. Alan Wake connection complete, let's move on to something new. Towards the end of March, I went on my annual family holiday to my favourite place on earth, the Lake District. With me, I took my Steam Deck, and on the drive down there, I booted up Spiritfarer. This is a game that is terribly advertised, as it is not at all what I expected. I can't spoil what's really going on as it recontextualizes the entire game, but you play as Stella, taking over from Karen to ferry souls to their final rest. As you progress through the game, you meet various spirits that take on the form of animals and help them to tie up loose ends and find peace before they're ready to move on. This game moved me in so many ways, gave me a new perspective on loss and grief, and would have for sure made me cry were I not playing this on the sofa next to my entire family. Also, the soundtrack is gas. Lastly, I also finished Disco Elysium. It was fine. In April, I started with... Okay, what do you want me to say? You already know that Disco Elysium is one of the best written and voice-acted games of all time. It's made by people who thanked Karl Marx in their Game Awards speech,
and Marx and Engels for providing us the political education. Thank you.
and the studio has gone on to have one of the most complex series of controversies of all time. I mean, this year alone, like 3 separate studios founded by people who worked on it have announced their spiritual successor to the game. You can't really get more communist than that. Jokes aside, this is a fantastic game with an incredibly high bar of quality for the writing, even with the astounding amount of it. It's very slow and honestly a step above reading a make-your-own-adventure book, but as long as you go into it knowing that, you'll have a great time. I can see why so many people love this game, but I only liked it. April is when I made one of the worst decisions I made all year and chose to spend the month playing new games from my backlog every single day. If you've watched that video, first of all, thank you. Nearly 20,000 views on a channel this small is mind-blowing. And secondly, you know just how terrible an idea this was. Somehow in all of that, I did actually manage to finish a few games. Jazzpunk and Sayonara Wild Hearts were both finished in their hour of the challenge, and I could not feel more different about them. Jazzpunk was a joke game that I could not get into, but humor is subjective, so it seems this wasn't for me. Sayonara Wild Hearts, however, 4 words. Holy moly. This game is honestly a transcendent experience that I always compare to seeing the fireworks display at Disney. It's just simply magical. Every level brought with it a new way to spice up the gameplay, the soundtrack is wonderful, and the visuals are so uniquely inspired that you can't help but scour the screen. I adore this game, and the studio has quickly become one of my favourites. The one game I completed outside of the challenge was Pacific Drive. If I was to say the best part about this game, it would absolutely be the vibes. Driving around a national park in a busted up station wagon, listening to the radio and occasionally pulling over to scavenge for supplies is just an immaculate vibe. Now sure, this game may not be for everyone. The constant resource drain from wear and tear, repetitive buildings and locations, and of course the joy of any game like this, inventory management. I can see how it would sicken people off, but I very much enjoyed my time through the anomaly and the radio show style story that went with it. May is where I really started to build up some momentum. I started with SteamWorld Build, a good game to blast through whilst watching videos in the background. Then The Pathless, something I started during the challenge and absolutely adored. It's a simple game with extremely satisfying movement, decent enough puzzles and glorious visuals. I got through it in a few longer play sessions and moved right along. Then BioShock Remastered. By all means, call me Zoomer-brained, but man oh man, I don't get why this game is held in such high regard. The setting is real cool, but the story is predictable, and that twist doesn't really change much. If you want to know why, look at my monthly review. 3 down, and we're not even 2 weeks in. Sunset Overdrive is next, and this I'm clearing from my list after chipping away at it for 3 whole months. Combines all the fun combo building from the Tony Hawk games with weird soda-based zombie killing. Then Walkabout Minigolf. My friend and I played through all the courses together, and we continue to pick up the new ones and work through them all from the start. This might just be the best VR game out there if you have someone to play it with, and isn't really completed here, but this is when we go up to date with the courses, so I'm counting it. And then a game stops me in my tracks and forces me to become obsessed to the point I play nothing but this for weeks until I get to the credits. Lorelei and Laser Eyes is from the same people who made Sayonara Wild Hearts, and it might just be the best game I played all year. Yes, it didn't score as highly as Baldur's Gate 3, but I have never played anything like it. The style is obviously outstanding, and every moment spent looking at this game is another visual feast. Beyond the style, the substance is just as filling, with a tsunami of puzzles ranging in difficulty from fairly simple to near impossible if you haven't been taking notes all game, and believe me, you will. Just look at my notepad from playing this. It looks like I'm hearing the voices again. Is this a game for everyone? Absolutely not. The note-taking requirements and puzzles will sicken a lot of people off who want to switch off in-game, but good God, to me, it's a masterpiece and I cannot wait to see what the team makes next. Coming off the heels of that to finish Neon White feels a bit underwhelming. I'm not saying Neon White is bad because it absolutely isn't. It's a fast-paced platformer where you're encouraged to get the best time possible and explore each map to unlock more story. Speaking of which, it's one hell of a ride with the right amount of cringe to keep you laughing with it, not at it. Make no mistake, a great game, and I'm glad I played it. In June, the momentum continues with Stray, which I played with my partner, then World of Horror after my recent enjoyment of manga, VR Bone Lab and Moss to clear some off I'd started a long time ago, and then Cult of the Lamb and Celeste to finish up the month. I don't have a ton to say that hasn't already been covered in the monthly reviews. All of these were pretty good, but nothing really changed my life. Sorry, Celeste girlies. July started with finishing off Star Wars Squadrons, and as a lifelong Star Wars fan, this was pretty good. Without the Star Wars coat of paint, it'd have been fine, but how can I not get excited to be piloting a TIE fighter and hear that scream as I press down the throttle? Nostalgia truly does conquer all. And then my existential arc began with Soma. I've already talked about this game at length in my Horror of Non-Existence video, but there is still so much here I haven't touched. If it weren't for the horrifying setting and the story, then this game would just be another survival horror in a sea of others. Thankfully, for all of us, it's so much more and something I will never forget playing. The Swapper is kind of the same thing, but in space. The swapping mechanic is such a clever idea that works as well for puzzles as it does for the story, and gets you asking questions on what level of life is worth living. Not so bad for an indie game made by primarily 2 people. Hard Space Shipbreaker is another excellent game to have on whilst you're watching something. The methodical process of stripping down a ship is such an excellent idea for a game, and throwing in a story about workers rising up to form a union and send an administrator packing, sign me up, comrade. It has some great stuff to talk about at a later point, but a great game to have played no matter what. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, based on the book of the same name, is one of those games I would not have even tried to play were it not for a video. These sorts of old style point and click adventures where you essentially try a random combination of actions until one works do not do anything for me, so a guide was used the entire time and I was still extremely bored. The story here is kinda cool, but calling this a game is a little generous. Again, call me Zoomer-brained, but this just isn't fun. Speaking of Zoomer-brained, RoboQuest is probably the most fast-paced game I completed all year. I like to have a single roguelite on the go at once, and RoboQuest filled that slot beautifully. The sheer number of weapons and playstyles kept every run fresh, and even if some felt stronger than others, there's a playstyle for anything if you look hard enough. Lastly, Returnal. Now I knew the plot of this game from watching Jacob Geller's video, and even so, playing it for myself, this game is simply phenomenal. You really do feel trapped, and each run feels like a Sisyphean exercise in futility. The storytelling in this game is so well written and presented that the excellent challenging gameplay is almost unimportant. It looks great, plays great, and is great. Yeah, it's a little bit hard sometimes, but man, the story is worth it for just how hard it hits. Plus, if I can play it, anyone can. I'm really not that good at games. Jacente was the first game to be cleared in August, and this is a truly beautiful game both in presentation and storytelling. You're essentially climbing through the ruins of a civilization, and you learn about the area and its inhabitants through shells that give you a glimpse into the sounds of the area, and letters between characters you come to know and follow as they grow older and you climb higher. The climbing mechanics are also really excellent and get you into a great meditative flow. It's not a perfect game and has its flaws, but no doubt, it's a real pleasure to have played it. After this, I went on a trip to London, and whilst I was there and on the trains back and forth, I played through Crow Country. This is another of those PlayStation-style survival horrors that are becoming so popular these days. Exploring an abandoned theme park is such a great setting for a game like this, and the story and enemy variety keep things interesting the whole way through. It's a short and sweet game, but no doubt one I very much enjoyed my time with. I then returned to Dredge to check out the Iron Rig DLC, and surprise surprise, it's just as good as the base game. This is one of my favourite games on the Steam Deck and one of the best games to have come out in the last year. The Iron Rig DLC is more of the same excellent quality game, so I have no complaints. I then ran through a couple of horror remakes, those being the Separate Ways DLC for Resident Evil 4 and the Dead Space remake. Honestly, I feel Resi 4 is one of the most overrated games and is absolutely a little bit too long, so playing a short version of that with a grappling hook was exactly what I needed to get me back into the series. Dead Space got its hooks into me deep and started me on my journey to write about one of the most difficult topics I've ever attempted. Space is just so hard to write about because it's everything and infinite. This small chunk of it, however, was a blast to play through, even if I did crush it in under a week.
This is also the month the Non-Existence video came out, and I just want to say, the day that video released was one of the most emotionally intense days I've had in a long time. First of all, the video itself took a lot out of me, and I somewhat dedicated it to my great-grandmother, which all came to a head once it was out there in the world. I also finished rewatching The Haunting of Bly Manor, and the final 30 minutes of that show, it breaks me every time. So yeah, let's just say I was going through it for a little bit when this dropped, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Grief is a horrible, painful thing, but it's also kind of beautiful. Making that video allowed me to pour that grief, that love into something I loved, and I hope that came across in the video. I want to play games and make videos that make me feel. I mean, look at the name of this channel, it's kind of the entire point. I love that something I can watch or play that is entirely fictional can make me feel things so real, and I love sharing that with other people, so thank you for letting me do that.
In September, I cleared off what might be the most video essay game of all time, The Outer Wilds and its Echoes of the Eye DLC. This is truly a one-of-a-kind game and an absolute treat to play for the first time. Go in blind and experience everything you can, you won't regret it. Frostpunk 2 was the game that came out this year that I was the most excited for, and honestly, it let me down a little bit. I was a huge fan of the first game and how it expertly wove the city building and storytelling together to get me to really care about my city. The first time I played through The City Must Survive is a memory that is seared into my soul, and the only thing I remember about Frostpunk 2 is frustration at the constant resource management. The increase in scale has resulted in a decrease in caring. Before, I would be upset if I lost a single person, as I only had a few hundred at the very most. Now I have thousands, so what's a few hundred deaths, as long as I can still staff my factories. Is this a commentary on capitalism? No, it's poor game design. I kid. It's a better game, but less gripping experience, and to me, that's a bit of a disappointment. Another tale of the dangers of being hyped. I also finished Underdogs VR, which goes down as the most British game I played all year, and it is a true miracle I managed to not destroy my entire house whilst playing this. Almost all VR games are some level of roguelike to hide their short runtimes, and this is no different. But it has some of the most satisfying combat in VR, so I'll let it off a little bit. October is where I started to slow down and start to analyse some of the problems with the system I'd built. I was making the monthly reviews of the games I completed, but some months I simply wasn't going to complete any games. Quite a few months, you can see, I finish a bunch of games all at once in the last few days in a desperate attempt to have something to talk about. October might be the worst example of that, with 4 games being completed in just over a week at the end of the month. I had these games chugging along nicely, but I felt the pressure to complete something and rush them all to the end as fast as I could. Animal Well was a really great game, and I was playing it for a video idea, which I promise is coming as soon as I can get it made. The base game is a treat to finish, and the true ending is a chore, so pick your poison carefully. Conscript was extremely disappointing to me. I've been loving these retro-style survival horror games recently, and was hoping for another banger. Sadly, the great potential in the setting and visual style is shot in both feet by the gameplay and obnoxious level of backtracking and inventory management. I only really finished it due to the sunk cost fallacy, and because it'll make a good example of the horror of war, but I cannot recommend it. Call of Cthulhu is another game I played exclusively for a video, and honestly should have just abandoned it until a later date when I could give it more attention, but that monthly review was coming, so I had to get it done. And lastly, Devil May Cry 5. Technically, I did speed through this, but not because it's going to be in a video or I needed games to talk about. This game is just that good. I completed the main game and yet have a long way to go to mastering its systems. This is actually one of those games I could see myself playing on repeat on high difficulties, which basically never happens. And I said it in the monthly video, but the soundtrack, I mean, my inner 13-year-old edgelord is screaming the whole time because this goes hard.
And that brings us to these last couple of months of the year when I decided to retire the monthly reviews in favour of doing one big yearly wrap-up, which is this video. I did actually finish one game in November, The Return of the Obra Dinn. My partner and I finally found some time to take a short break and a long weekend, and the weather was not ideal for going outside for 3 days solid, so we just sat in that house binging TV shows and video games.
The Return of the Obra Dinn is something I knew was a masterpiece before going in, and yet I was still blown away by just how great it was. The mystery of what happened on the ship alongside each and every member of the crew being revealed piece by piece as you view more of their last moments is such a genius way to structure a mystery game. The book is such a fun mechanic where you note down your guesses and hope that you're right. The only problem I have with this game is that some fates or identities require actual guesswork, but by the time you reach them you have a limited suspect pool, so it's not so bad. I finished it in 2 days and I loved every moment. The start of this month, I was pretty slammed with work and got sick at the same time, so I didn't find a lot of time to play much. The only thing I've completed so far is Little Nightmares, which I started on the trip. The world building managed by this game without the use of dialogue is next level good. It's one of the creepiest games you'll play with extremely memorable enemies like the long-armed collector, the pair of chefs, or the horde of gluttonous passengers. I'm sure there's more than enough story to be found by repeated playthroughs and more detailed exploration, but even on a single run-through, it's a great horror experience. My only complaint is probably the slightly janky controls, but it mostly adds to the horror, so it's still a great game and a great example for a video one day. And that brings us to right now. So let's do a quick fire round of numbers for 2024. I completed 55 games and have a total trackable time of roughly 535 hours. Dividing this by the number of games I have data for, 49, we come out to an average of 10.9 hours per game. Now let's answer those questions I laid out at the start. First of all, what worked? I've completed 55 games this year, which is just over one per week, so that's a pretty crazy rate of completion. Laying out all of your games into a spreadsheet or some other kind of list makes it so much easier to choose something to play. It can of course get way out of control if you list every game on every console you ever want to play, but as long as you organize it well, it really does help. As for what didn't work, I already talked about how I would rush to complete games as the months came to a close, and this problem was actually twofold. Don't get me wrong, I have enjoyed the monthly game reviews, but they forced me to rush completing games and avoid playing anything longer that I can't get done in a single month. I've blazed through games that might have had more impact on me if I went through them at my own pace, and I've mainly stuck to much shorter games this year rather than completing anything longer. 10.9 hours per game isn't that much time, as 10 hours is considered on the shorter end of a playtime. In Baldur's Gate 3 alone, I spent over 8 times that long, and the payoff was one of the most emotional completions of a game I've ever experienced. I think going into 2025, I'd like to give myself time to play more longer games so I can experience more of those near life-changing moments. It makes sense that a game I played for 10 hours over a week won't have as much impact on me as one I played for 100 hours over a few months. This will likely result in a reduction of games completed, but that's something I'm willing to do for more impact per game. I'm not saying I'm totally abandoning shorter games or that they don't have impact, by the way. There's a huge number of shorter titles I have on my list and I'm desperate to play. I just mean I'll sprinkle them in alongside a grand adventure for a bit more variety on my end. Another consequence of the monthly reviews and pressure to finish games is honestly a lack of essay-based content on this channel. I've got so many ideas written down that I get really excited for, only to realize I have to finish some games and review them. Peter McKinnon released a video recently about how you can't let yourself get used to not making games because then it becomes the norm. I definitely let myself get used to pushing back essay videos just so I could make reviews, and that's one of the main reasons I'm moving from monthly to yearly. I want to make those essay videos while I'm still in that phase of excitement I get with every new idea. The longer I go, the less excited I get, and that translates to the final product, which I don't want to happen. Another thing I noticed was that I chose games to play more based on if I felt like they'd make a good video topic, rather than if I really wanted to play them. Now this isn't a terrible thing. I chose to play Soma because I wanted to play it. Then I played other games to look for more examples. I think this is just fine to make sure the video idea gets made while I'm still excited, and I can immerse myself in a topic as much as possible. Where this becomes a problem is when I stop playing games that I want to for purely fun reasons and only play things that have something I think will be worth talking about. Aside from the obvious problem that I'm assuming what games will be about before even playing them, this has a number of other issues attached to it. As much as I love making these videos, I got into games because they were fun and I'd like to hold on to that as much as possible. Plus, the games that I played because I wanted to ended up being some of my favourite things I've played, like Lorelei and the Laser Eyes or The Return of the Obra Dinn. There's a balance in there somewhere, and I need to work a lot more on finding it going forwards. We've already covered what I played, so finally, would I recommend something like this to a friend, family member, or you watching this video? I mean, I've already recommended something like this to my friend, and we've both been completing way more games than usual. My spreadsheet has seen some changes over the last year, and there is still more to be made in future. But the bottom line is just take some time to organize your list so it's easy to look through, make a decision, and just play something. We've all been there, at 10 PM after you get off a 7 loss streak on Overwatch Ranked, and you just want to stare at the wall for an hour until you fall asleep. Just pick something that you're currently playing, or something you want to play, and commit to playing it for however long you have, whether that's an hour, 30 minutes, whatever you've got. If you push through that choice paralysis and make a decision, I promise you, you will feel better and have an easier time deciding in future. It's just like anything. Now, you're building the habit of not deciding what to play until it becomes the norm. If you instead make it a habit to pick something and play, you'll be doing it naturally in no time. And if you want to use my exact spreadsheet, I'll link a template down below, but my advice would be to use it as a foundation and find something that works for you. The only bits I'd say are totally essential are the titles of games, the how long to beat data, and then some notes about the game to fill in as you go. Everything else is totally optional data that I only like because I'm a nerd. If you have these 3 things, you'll be able to pick games easier based on what you have time for, and be able to look back at the end of the year and remember everything you've played in much more detail. The entire point of me doing this type of organization was, yes, partly so I could get through more games, but also to remember the games I've played in much more detail. For example, I finished Red Dead Redemption 2 before I started doing this, and I know I enjoyed it and I really loved the story and the characters, but that's about it. Compare that to Baldur's Gate 3 and I have my thoughts written down as I was in the process of playing the game. I can tell you in much more detail about specific events, mechanics, or characters I enjoyed. Not only is this very useful in a video sense so I can skim through games I've completed to see if any of them hold a relevant example to what I'm talking about, it also just makes me happy to read through my old thoughts and remember the times of playing each of these games.
This video is absolutely dragging on way longer than it needs to, so I'll leave you with this. No matter what you're doing, whether that is playing games, watching movies, trying out recipes, or whatever else gives you joy in life, it doesn't hurt to keep some sort of record of all of your experiences. We each have a limited amount of time in which to live our lives, and personally, I want to remember how I spent as much of that time as I can. This past year, I've been scared, I've laughed, and yes, I've even cried whilst playing these games, and I, for one, can't wait to do it all again next year.
And with that, we end 2024. Honestly, this has been a pretty crazy first year for this channel. I never expected to get over 1,000 subscribers or have a video that nearly has 20,000 views in any sort of period of time, never mind a year. I really do mean it when I say that I make these videos because I love doing it, and believe me when I say that I want to make more of these, so fingers crossed I can actually keep to that promise going forward into 2025. I'm already making changes to my backlog and I'm really excited about this new approach to it, so I can't wait to share that with you next year and hopefully have some videos between now and then. Anyway, I should probably wrap this one up, so thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments below your favorite game that you played this year. God knows my backlog can only grow larger. Like the video if you did, love yourself no matter what, subscribe if you want to see more, and for now, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.